Like when I got into the business, there was a lot of guys that had stopped creating, and wrestling was becoming a routine. Everybody had a routine, and that's all you did. You just stayed in the routine. And I think when Dynamite came along in Calgary, we changed that up a lot. It became like no more routines. We're going to just ad lib and do stuff, and we're going to. And I think I brought a lot of, and I think Dynamite also did, but the Hart to the Stampede guys brought a lot of that to WWE when we came there. We started making everyone pick up the pace a little bit. Wrestling was supposed to be bang, bang, bang. And
yeah, but you guys, what I noticed when I was watching, I watched about 3 matches with you and Dynamite last night. You guys had a hell of a pace going. But
yeah,
between the bumps, between the holds, stuff in transition. I mean, once you knocked the guy down, whether it was you or Dynamite, and both of you guys were selling your asses off. I mean, it was Picasso and Rembrandt on the salesman aspect of that match, and great offensive moves. But you guys weren't rushing through the process. You were taking your time. And I want to talk a little bit more about your rivalry, your matches in the early days of Calgary with Dynamite. And I want to talk more about your early matches in Calgary, the Stampede Wrestling with Dynamite. When we left off, we were talking about Dynamite Kid. We were talking about your matches in the ring, how you guys had a quick work rate, but were taking your time and telling the stories. I've always wanted to know a little bit more about Dynamite. Unfortunately, I was never able to meet him while he was still in the ring. What kind of guy was he?
He was, I think, the guy that changed wrestling to where it is right now. He deserves the most credit of anybody I can think of. Maybe me, and maybe in some other ways I'm behind him in that. But he really changed wrestling, and he was so fast-paced, and he learned his wrestling psychology or wrestling style in England, which was rooted in actually shoot kind of wrestling, right, with a lot of silly kind of wrestling at the same time, like flips and rolls and tumbling and sort of funny type of wrestling that a lot of Americans laughed at wrestlers that worked like that. But there was some guys that, even Fit Finlay and guys like that before that were, real good wrestlers and legit wrestlers that were in the business. And so in England, you could go to one show and it'd be a lot of, not very good workers, say, and you might go to another show 10 miles up the road, and it's full of like really hard workers and old shooters and guys putting on great matches. And England had its share of great workers, and Dynamite learned a lot of that. And when he came to Calgary and Stampede Wrestling, he was always unfortunately a guy that had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. Though he had a small man complex. He was a small guy.
How tall was Dynamite straight up?
He was about 5'8".
Okay.
5'8", which made him not very tall, but not so short. Like he
was a guy just a walking.
I mean, I saw him. He was like a pit bull. He was a real pit bull of wrestling. And
but was he just a mean-spirited guy?
He was. He was a good guy. He was like a mean little pit bull.
Right.
If you made friends with him and you got to know him, he was the friendliest little pit bull in the world. But if you crossed him,
he'd
bite your head off. He was afraid of no man. I mean, when I say that, I mean nobody. He was one of those kind of guys that would go nose to nose with the biggest guy in the company over anything, over the smallest thing, and usually just establish that who he was. He seemed to always want to be the toughest guy in the room, and generally was accorded that respect all the time, because a lot of times, pretty much no matter, despite his size, he was the toughest guy in the room. He was a tough, really tough little guy.
When I watched you guys in the ring from your earlier matches back in the day, you guys were just seemingly so on the same page and had such chemistry. Was it like that the first time you locked up? Was it something that was acquired? Because just watching you two work together, there's from and I coming from myself, there's seemingly almost no communication going on in that ring, and you guys are just telling the story and beating the living dog shit out of each other and having kick-ass matches.
Well, the truth about me and Dynamite is that I saw him, I worked with him the very first. I had actually had I had my first wrestling match, I think, the week before, and then they asked me to go again, and I said, I didn't want to go. I said, I'm just learning how to wrestle. I was going to Puerto Rico, and but they sent me around on the road trip because they were short one guy, and somebody else was wrestling Dynamite, and they promised me a real easy match with sort of an old veteran guy that was going to, lead me through the moves and kind of make sure I looked okay. And so I had it all planned. I had the whole match set up, and it was really easy, or at least for me, it was hard. But something happened, and the guy wouldn't work with Dynamite, and they switched it, and told me that I had to wrestle him. I said, I can't wrestle an English guy. I know how to take a few bumps and stuff, but I don't know how to wrestle. I just started. I had my first match last week. Yeah. Give me a break. Like, I can't do a bunch of flips and rolls. I'd already seen Dynamite stuff.
Right.
And they made me wrestle Dynamite. And Dynamite sitting in the dressing room watching me sort of make this big thing. I remember I kept telling him, it's not that I don't want to wrestle you, it's just that I don't know how to wrestle you. But he took offense to all that. And he broke me in Dynamite style. We worked for most of the match, but every now and then he just kicked me in the face as hard as he could, or he just suplexed me over the top rope, like right onto the floor, or like it was just.
Dude, was that a shoot?
Huh?
Was that a shoot?
Yeah, that was a shoot.
That's
really
one.
Hurt you.
Yeah, that's on YouTube. That suplex over the top rope is one of the most brutal things I've ever seen in my life. It was phenomenal. It was spectacular if you're on the watching end of it. If you're on the receiving end of it, not so much.
Well, and I say this with all great sadness, is that same bump that we did perfectly that day on that show and didn't hurt ourselves is the same one that he did with Dynamite, or he did with Davey years later for a finish in Japan when they finally had to wrestle each other. So it was a big match. And Dynamite let Davey suplex him over the top, and Dynamite hurt his back on the ring apron. And that's the back injury that sort of ruined his life.
Was that the back injury? Because I thought it was in a tag match where seemingly he kind of almost tripped coming off the rope.
You heard of wrestling Morocco and Orton somewhere in Hamilton.
But that was the match that kind of broke the
match that really did it when he first.
Right.
They came back. They carried him back to the dressing room. They put him on ice They put ice on his pack for about an hour or 30 minutes because he had to wait for his last. He wrestled again. He went in and wrestled. That was a Tiger mask, but he wrestled another mask guy and won the title that week, or with that time in Japan. But I mean, I just know that he always had problems with his back. Lower back was always sort of just twinging on him all the time, right till it finally just, it just went. That a few years later.
I'd love to talk with that guy a little bit. I've seen some stuff on him. I guess he's in a wheelchair over there. But like you said, I mean, that guy really paved a way for a lot of guys to follow and was stylistically just a trendsetter from the innovation standpoint.
Another thing about Dynamite that I loved about him, and I think people some people don't, they don't like him or don't have respect for him. But the truth is that like there was always a story about Honky Tonk talking about when Harley Race had some kind of abdominal surgery, or he had some complications that had to take a bunch of his intestine out, and he was off the road suddenly, and everyone was we just heard about it in the dressing room, and Honky Tonk said some remark in the dressing room about, I guess he doesn't got any guts anymore. And Dynamite got up and walked over and just backhanded him, knocked him off the chair.
Wow.
And that's what like. Dynamite was the policeman in the dressing room.
Right.
He didn't let any bullshit or somebody come in with an attitude, or a guy that was a superstar. Like, they had to come in and had to earn their rights in the dressing room with the boys, the guys that were doing the work, and the guys. And he was a really good. That's what I mean. There was a lot of guys will tell you that's what. He was a bit of a bully, and he was a bit of a bully. Like, I can think of other situations where it was over the line, but with Jacques Rougeau, for example. But there was times that Dynamite, being a bully and being a bit of a policeman, would straighten out guys. Like that whole thing that happened years later with Shawn, with Shawn's personality back in the 90s. The truth is, if Dynamite Kid had been in the dressing room, none of that would ever happen.
Right. Interesting.
He would have policed that and straightened that out before it became an issue. The boys don't do that. The boys had their own locker room. to a certain degree than the talent. You had to always be one of the boys first.